Morning light crept through the thin curtains of Aisha's small room, painting soft lines across the cracked walls. She woke up before the sun fully rose, just like she did every day. Her body still felt heavy from yesterday's work, but she pushed herself up because she didn't have the luxury to slow down. Her widowed mother was sleeping on the mat beside her, and her younger brother was curled up on the other side of the room, clutching his school bag even in his sleep. Aisha watched them for a moment. They were her reason to keep going. Every long day, every quiet struggle, every pain she hid behind a calm face, it was all for them. She moved silently, washing her face with cold water that made her teeth clench. She tied her hair back in a simple knot and adjusted her faded scarf. There was no time to think about herself. She had a new job to keep, a job she had prayed for because the pay was slightly better than the last one. It was in a rich neighborhood, in one of those houses she once walked past and wondered what life felt like inside. After a quick goodbye, she stepped out into the early morning air. The street was quiet, and she felt the familiar mix of hope and fear settle in her chest. Hope that life might finally get better, fear that something could go wrong as it always did. When she reached the large house where she worked, the tall gates and polished walkway made her feel small. The place looked calm from the outside, but Aisha had already learned that calmness could hide storms. She entered through the side door as all workers did and walked into the kitchen. Other servants were already moving around, chopping vegetables, boiling tea, cleaning utensils, each trying to avoid the lady of the house's anger. Aisha greeted them softly. Most replied with tired nods. Some didn't bother. In a place like this, everyone had learned that emotions were a luxury. You worked. You survived. You kept quiet. She picked up her cleaning supplies and began her day. While sweeping the hallway, she often felt invisible. People walked past her without noticing her existence, as if she were part of the furniture. Still, she worked with quiet determination. She believed that doing her best was the only thing in her control. But inside her heart lived a soft ache, a longing for something more. Not riches, not a fancy life. Just dignity, respect, maybe one day even love. But she knew her status made those dreams dangerous. That thought usually ended when she remembered Hamza, the lady of the house's son. She had only seen him a few times, but those moments were enough to confuse her. He had a gentle smile, kind eyes, and a respectful tone, something she rarely experienced. He always greeted her like she was a human being, not a servant. But every time she felt her heart react, she shut the feeling down immediately. A man like him belonged to a world she could only watch from afar. And she could not afford broken hopes. Still, even trying to stop a feeling didn't always work. Aisha began to learn the rhythm of the house. Every morning, Madame Farah, the owner of the house, walked down the stairs in crisp clothes, expensive perfume surrounding her like an invisible shield. Her footsteps were light but powerful, and the whole staff watched her movements the way children watch a lit match, afraid it might drop. Farah was elegant, no doubt. But there was an icy wall around her. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it never reached her eyes. Her temper was sharp, and her judgments came quicker than the servants could breathe. Aisha noticed details others didn't. She saw how Farah often paused before entering her late husband's office. She saw how her hands trembled slightly when she looked at old photos. She saw her loneliness, tucked away behind expensive jewelry and perfect makeup. But Aisha kept her distance. She didn't want trouble. Every servant had a story about Farah's moods. Someone once placed a spoon on the wrong tray, and she shouted for minutes. Another servant forgot to fold a napkin properly and was sent home for the day without pay. Aisha didn't want to become the next example. Despite the luxury of the house, tension lived in every corner. There were unspoken rules, unseen limits, conversations that died the moment Farah walked in. In the middle of all this, Hamza's presence felt like a breath of fresh air. He didn't visit often, but whenever he entered, the atmosphere changed. He greeted every worker with a soft nod. He thanked the cook for his meals. He even helped an old servant carry heavy boxes once, which shocked everyone. Aisha tried not to look at him too long, afraid someone would notice. But whenever their eyes met by accident, she felt something warm inside her, something she didn't allow herself to name. Once, he smiled gently when she handed him a glass of water. She lowered her gaze quickly, her hands trembling. That small moment lived in her mind for days, even though she tried to push it away. It didn't take long for Farah to sense something, even if it was just the smallest shift. One afternoon, Aisha overheard Farah telling a relative, Hamza must stay focused on his work and future. I will not allow him to mix with the staff. These workers, they don't know their place. The word stung Aisha more than they should have. She wasn't trying to mix with anyone. She just existed where life pushed her. Still, Farah's tone made it clear. The walls of the house were not just physical. They were emotional, social, and unbreakable. Aisha tried harder to stay unnoticed. She kept her eyes down, her steps light, her voice soft. But even then, small things kept bringing Hamza and her into the same space. A dropped towel he picked up before she could. A smile exchanged without planning. A simple thank you that made her heartbeat flutter. But with every kind moment came fear. She felt that any connection, even innocent, could cost her job. The house carried too many secrets, too many expectations, too many barriers that people like her were not allowed to cross. She continued working, learning the house's hidden tensions and quiet storms. Farah's coldness, Hamza's kindness, the servants' silent suffering. The world behind the beautiful walls was darker than outsiders could imagine. Aisha didn't know it yet, but something was coming. Something small but powerful. Something that would change her life forever. And it would begin with a single object she never meant to find. A bracelet. The afternoon sun hung lazily in the sky, casting long shadows across the halls of the mansion. The house was unusually quiet, with Farah resting in her room and most servants busy in the kitchen. It was Aisha's job today to clean the master bedroom, a task she always approached carefully. One mistake inside that room could mean trouble. She pushed the door open gently. The room smelled of perfume and polished wood. Everything was placed perfectly, pillows stacked neatly, curtains drawn slightly open, the dressing table shining like glass. Aisha moved slowly, wiping surfaces and sweeping corners, her thoughts drifting between hope, fear, and dreams she wasn't supposed to have. When she knelt by the side of the bed to dust the lower shelves, her hand brushed against something cold. She looked down. A delicate, golden bracelet lay half-hidden under the bed frame. Her breath caught. It was beautiful, thin but heavy-looking, lined with tiny jewels that sparkled even in the dim light. It didn't look like an ordinary piece of jewelry. It looked precious, expensive, important. Aisha's first instinct was the right one. I should return it. She reached for it carefully, holding it like something sacred. But just as she stood up, footsteps echoed in the hallway, sharp, quick, the kind that made her freeze. Her heart jumped. What if someone walked in right now and saw her holding it? What if they didn't believe she had just found it? What if they accused her of stealing? She had seen it happen before, servants blamed for things they didn't do. Without thinking, driven purely by fear, she slipped the bracelet into her pocket. Her hands shook as she picked up her cleaning cloth, pretending nothing happened. The footsteps passed. But the pounding in her chest didn't stop. The whole time she finished cleaning, she kept feeling the weight of the bracelet in her pocket, a weight heavier than gold. She planned to return it later, when the moment was calm, when she could speak without trembling. But fate had different plans. By evening, the entire house erupted into chaos. A sharp scream broke the silence. It came from upstairs, from Farah's bedroom. Within seconds, servants rushed toward the sound. Aisha followed slowly, her stomach twisting. She reached the room to find Farah standing by her dressing table, her face drained of color, her hands shaking. Jewelry boxes were opened, drawers pulled out. The bracelet, my mother's bracelet, it's gone. Farah shouted. Her voice was full of panic, the kind that came from deep emotional pain rather than anger alone. Servants stood still, exchanging nervous glances. Someone whispered that the bracelet was an heirloom, passed down through generations. Aisha felt her legs weaken. Farah turned sharply, her eyes scanning the room. Who was cleaning here today? She demanded. Silence. Then one servant spoke in a trembling voice. Madam, Aisha was assigned today. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, heavy, accusing, piercing. Aisha swallowed hard. Her tongue felt tied. Her mind screamed to speak, but her fear held her hostage. Farah stepped closer, her voice dangerously low. You were here. You cleaned this room. And now my bracelet is gone. Do you have something to say? Aisha opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her throat felt tight. She wasn't trying to hide the truth. She simply didn't know where to start. How do you explain fear? How do you tell the truth when no one believes workers in houses like this? Farah's expression shifted from shock to pure suspicion. Search the servants, she ordered. Gasps filled the hallway. Aisha's heart fell to the floor. Two female workers hesitated, then stepped forward, afraid of disobeying. Aisha backed away slightly, tears gathering in her eyes. I didn't, she whispered, but her voice was so weak it was lost in the noise. Farah glared at her, anger replacing fear. I trusted you in my home. And this is how you repay me. Aisha felt crushed under the weight of the accusation. She wanted to scream she found it, that she hid it only because she panicked, not because she wanted it. But the moment felt poisoned. Even her breath felt guilty. Before anyone could touch her, a familiar voice cut through the noise. Stop. Hamza stepped forward from the hallway. He looked tired, as if he had just arrived home and walked into a storm. His eyes scanned the room, landing finally on Aisha. He saw the terror in her eyes before anyone else did. What's happening? He asked, his voice sharp but calm. Farah turned to him. Your grandmother's bracelet is missing. And this girl, she gestured at Aisha harshly, she was the last person in the room. Aisha lowered her gaze, tears falling silently. She felt smaller than ever. Hamza looked at her carefully. Aisha, he said softly, did you see anything? She tried to speak, but once again panic held her words prisoner. Her silence only made things worse. Farah folded her arms. See? Why is she quiet if she's innocent? You're too soft-hearted, Hamza. These people, you can't trust them. The servants all stepped back, creating distance between themselves and Aisha, as if betrayal was contagious. Aisha felt alone. Lost. Drowning. Hamza took a step toward her, ignoring his mother's glare. Aisha, he said again, gentler now, I need you to tell me anything you know. She looked up at him. For a moment she thought he saw the truth in her eyes, the guilt, the fear, the honesty. But her voice cracked before the words came. I don't know, she whispered, her voice trembling. Farah exploded. That's enough. She's lying, she yelled. Fire her before she steals something else. The words hit Aisha like a slap. Her chest tightened. Her vision blurred. She wasn't a thief. She wasn't. Hamza looked between his mother and Aisha, confusion and concern battling inside him. He opened his mouth to argue, but Farah silenced him with a glare that warned him not to defend a servant. Aisha felt her world collapsing. She had wanted dignity. Now she stood accused, shamed, and humiliated. She felt the bracelet in her pocket burning her like fire, reminding her of the mistake that started everything. And she didn't know how to fix it. That night the house stayed cold and tense. Aisha sat alone in the servants' quarters, her hands shaking. She wanted to return the bracelet, she needed to. But the right moment never came. Fear trapped her in place. Outside the door she heard whispers. I knew she was too quiet. Poor girl. But jobs come before friendships. Better her than us. Those words cut deeper than Farah's anger. Aisha pressed her forehead against her knees, tears soaking her clothes. She wasn't just afraid of losing her job, she felt crushed under guilt. Guilt for not being braver. Guilt for letting fear win. She didn't even hear Hamza quietly step into the room, watching her cry. But that moment belonged to the next chapter of her life, the one where truth, courage, and compassion would finally meet. For now, the storm of accusations had only begun, and the real test of trust was still to come. Days after the awkward confrontation in the mansion, Sanaa remained suspended between uncertainty and cautious hope. The humiliation she feared, for stealing, for lying, for being seen as less, did not arrive. Instead, her quiet dedication began speaking louder than her past mistakes. Each morning she arrived earlier than expected, completing tasks before anyone else woke, smoothing over small household problems before they could even be noticed. She tried, in her own silent way, to prove she did not need the bracelet to have dignity. Yet beneath her composure lived a constant fear that the situation might erupt again, that someone in the house still doubted her, that the bracelet ordeal would return to haunt her at the worst moment. Still, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself the luxury of imagining a future where her presence in the household wasn't merely tolerated but respected. Armin's support strengthened this fragile hope. He had stopped hiding his feelings, no longer pretending she was just an employee, no longer suffocating under the expectations of his upcoming engagement. Sanaa did not fully trust this fragile closeness, afraid that any dream built on it could fall apart. But she also couldn't deny how deeply she felt seen when he was near. Something in him reached toward her steadily, as if he weren't choosing her by accident but by instinct. Mrs. Khadija kept observing Sanaa quietly and intently, weighing the girl's character with every passing day. Her gaze softened, but her reservations lingered. She admired Sanaa's humility and work ethic, yet feared the consequences if her son's heart led him toward someone society would never approve of. The household atmosphere shifted between unspoken acceptance and unspoken tension. And then came the moment that brought hope back into Sanaa's chest. Mrs. Khadija called her into the private sitting room, calmly, politely, almost fondly. She offered Sanaa tea. She asked about her family, where she grew up, what her dreams had once been before life had reshaped them. Sanaa answered carefully, aware that honesty could make or break her entire future. To her surprise, there was warmth in Khadija's reactions. A flicker of recognition, perhaps of a younger version of herself, someone who had once been pushed into a life of expectations rather than allowed to choose her own. This subtle shift gave Sanaa hope, but only enough to make her terrified of losing it. Because even as trust began stitching itself between them, unseen shadows thickened at the edges of their fragile peace. The wealthy families entangled in Armin's engagement started asking questions. Rumors spread, first quietly among acquaintances, then dangerously close to home. Stories twisted themselves into question marks. Why was Armin avoiding his fiancée? Why was he defending a maid? Why did his mother suddenly seem softer, reflective, distracted? These whispers threatened to collapse everything. And Sanaa sensed it before she understood it. The mansion felt heavier, corridors filled with restrained voices, phone calls ending abruptly when she passed by. Her instincts screamed that a confrontation was coming, that all her attempts at redemption would soon be weighed against society's cruelty. But she did not know yet that the storm forming around her wasn't simply about a lost and found bracelet. It was about the truth behind it, a truth no one had dared to speak. The emotional quiet that had settled in the mansion shattered the morning Armin's fiancée arrived unannounced. Her presence alone filled the space with tension. Her voice cut through the air, sharp, demanding, hurt. She accused Armin publicly of humiliating her, of disrespecting their arrangement, of embarrassing both families. But more than anything, she accused him of hiding something. Something, or someone. Sanaa knew instantly who that someone was. She tried to disappear into her work, but arguments stormed through the house like waves hitting a fragile shore. She heard raised voices from behind closed doors, the clash of expectation against defiance, and the breaking of illusions that had kept the household together for years. Armin, usually calm and measured, spoke with a passion that revealed how deeply he cared. His fiancée's tears turned quickly into threats. His parents struggled to preserve dignity while facing chaos. Within hours, extended family members arrived. The situation spiraled further, fueled by pride, fear, and gossip. And then someone, Armin's uncle, a man who cared more about reputation than truth, delivered the blow Sanaa never saw coming. He announced that before anyone made decisions about the future, they needed to address the maid who stole the bracelet. The accusation she thought had been resolved returned like a knife. At that moment, the room erupted in murmurs. Some whispered suspicion, others feigned shock. Sanaa felt her body freeze as if the floor had become water beneath her feet. She thought she had escaped this humiliation, yet here it was, resurrected at the worst possible time. But the true shock was still unfolding. Mrs. Khadija stepped forward, not with the anger Sanaa feared, but with something entirely unexpected: resolve. She revealed that she had misplaced the bracelet. That Sanaa had attempted to return it exactly as she claimed. That the entire ordeal had been a misunderstanding rooted in assumptions and class bias. The confession silenced the room. But then she went further, admitting that the bracelet held emotional significance not just because it was expensive, but because it belonged to her late mother-in-law, a woman she had clashed with frequently. Losing it had triggered guilt and grief she had never fully confronted. When Sanaa returned it, the moment had forced her to face emotions she wasn't ready for: fear of loss, of failure, of repeating old mistakes. This truth changed everything. Suddenly the accusation against Sanaa collapsed. But with it collapsed something else: the illusion of control Mrs. Khadija had spent years maintaining. As silence filled the room, Sanaa looked up, seeing in Khadija not judgment but vulnerability. A woman who had been wounded by life too, who recognized in Sanaa the same fear of losing dignity. But before the moment could transform into understanding, Armin's uncle redirected the narrative. "Even if she did not steal," he said coldly, "she is still just a maid." This single sentence fractured the fragile peace. Armin stepped forward, positioning himself protectively beside Sanaa, not as an employer, but as someone whose feelings could no longer be hidden. Gasps filled the room. His uncle's disapproval deepened. His fiancée's heartbreak became fury. His parents struggled to absorb the chaos. And Sanaa, standing at the center of judgment, felt her world teeter between destruction and a truth she had never dared to claim. She realized then that the storm was not about a bracelet. It was about the collision of past mistakes, buried emotions, class divides, love no one expected, and a future being rewritten in real time. The truth had surfaced, but so had the consequences. And nothing that happened next would be easy. The fallout from that single sentence, "She is still just a maid," lingered in the air like a wound that refused to close. Even after the extended family dispersed in frustrated murmurs and unspoken judgments, the house felt suffocated by tension. The truth about the bracelet had been revealed, yet instead of offering closure, it only peeled back more layers of conflict waiting to erupt. Sanaa retreated to the staff quarters, shaking, desperately trying to ground herself. She had endured humiliation before, poverty had taught her resilience, but there was something about being reduced to just a maid, in front of the man she loved, in front of the woman who had started learning to trust her, that left her feeling painfully exposed. She wished she could remove herself from their world entirely, gather whatever dignity remained, and flee before more damage could be done. But she also couldn't ignore the heartbreak in Armin's eyes. He found her moments later, breathless, agitated, torn between fury and helplessness. He apologized, not for loving her but for how carelessly the world around them treated her. His words weren't romantic confessions. They were raw statements of frustration, of a man watching the life he was expected to live collapse under the weight of his own conscience. Yet Sanaa kept her distance. She knew love couldn't survive in the dark unless exposed to truth, and right now too many truths were choking the light. Mrs. Khadija, overwhelmed by guilt and the realization of how deeply her son's happiness was entangled with this young woman, stayed silent for hours, replaying every moment she had judged Sanaa unfairly. The bracelet, once a symbol of status and lineage, now represented her own biases, and the possibility that she might lose her son if she didn't confront them. Meanwhile, whispers spread quickly among the extended family. By evening, Armin's uncle had rallied support to force a meeting the next day, one that would restore respectability. The implied meaning was clear: end the scandal, end the rumors, end any possibility between Armin and Sanaa. And so the night ended in quiet devastation. When dawn came, the mansion's living room became a battlefield. Armin was asked to respond to the accusations now swirling outside the home. Accusations about his conduct, about Sanaa, about the broken engagement proposal. His uncle spoke as if reputation were the only thing that mattered. His fiancée's father issued warnings about the humiliation their family suffered. Everyone demanded that he distance himself from Sanaa, dismiss her from the household, and fix the situation before it spiraled further. And then, something none of them expected happened. Mrs. Khadija spoke, not with hesitation or fear, but with steady conviction. She declared that she would not allow anyone to punish Sanaa for their assumptions. She admitted her own fault in escalating the bracelet incident. She confessed her guilt over allowing pride to cloud her judgment. And finally, she said something that stunned the room. She is not just a maid. She is a human being. And she has shown more loyalty and integrity than many of us here. For a moment, everyone fell silent. But her words came with consequences. Her admission meant siding with her son against the expectations of her family. It meant choosing compassion over status. It meant becoming the subject of judgment herself. Armin's uncle, refusing to surrender control, delivered one final ultimatum. Either Armin ended whatever existed between him and Sanaa, or he would face public disgrace, business fallout, and the collapse of relationships that had kept the family standing secure for decades. This time, however, Armin didn't hold back. He spoke with unfiltered truth. He revealed that his engagement had been forced, that his feelings had never belonged to his fiancée, that he was exhausted from living a life that wasn't his. He insisted that Sanaa had never sought his affection or anyone's wealth. She had simply done her job, honestly, humbly, with dignity, and he would not allow her to suffer because of his choices. His declaration shattered the last remaining illusion of control that others tried to assert. His fiancée, humiliated and distraught, broke down, accusing him of ruining her life. Her pain was real and Armin felt it, but he also knew their engagement was a performance neither of them deserved to be trapped in. The families collapsed into arguments. Accusations, tears, pleas, threats. Everything collided in a chaotic storm that shook the foundations of the home. And then, overwhelmed and terrified of causing more damage, Sanaa stepped forward with a quiet strength no one expected. She said she would leave. Not because she was guilty. Not because she felt unworthy. But because she could not allow Armin or his mother to lose their relationships, their respect, and their family peace because of her presence. She thanked Mrs. Khadija for her honesty. She told Armin that love should not come at the cost of destruction. Her voice was steady, but her heart was breaking. And then she walked away, suitcase in hand, not looking back. The absence she left behind changed everything. 4 days, the mansion felt lifeless, its corridors echoing with the silence of things left unsaid. Armin searched everywhere for her. Her neighborhood, old workplaces, shelters, relatives, anyone who might know where she had gone. But Sanaa had disappeared with the same quiet determination that defined her life, moving without leaving a trace, surviving without asking for help. Mrs. Khadija mourned her departure more deeply than she expected. She realized that Sanaa's presence had challenged her in ways she needed. The bracelet incident, once a symbol of disappointment, became a reminder of the humility she had forgotten. She found herself defending Sanaa in conversations with family, insisting that compassion mattered more than status. Yet her words often returned hollow because deep inside she battled her own longing, for forgiveness, for clarity, for the chance to make things right. Meanwhile, the stories spreading among their social circles became twisted tales of scandal. Some claimed Armin had eloped. Others said the maid had blackmailed the family. Others insisted the engagement was destroyed because of jealousy. Gossip became a monster with many mouths, and every version poisoned the truth. Armin refused to bow to the pressure. He ended the engagement formally, facing the anger of the other family with dignity rather than guilt. He confronted his uncle, rejecting every threat. His father, though initially disappointed, began to realize that forcing his son into a life he didn't want would destroy him. Slowly, painfully, the family began accepting that the truth, even if uncomfortable, was better than a carefully maintained lie. Yet none of this brought Sanaa back. Weeks passed. The household rebuilt itself, but its heart felt emptied. Armin feared he had lost her forever. He missed her presence, the way she moved quietly yet filled the space with sincerity. But more than anything, he missed the way she made him feel seen, not as heir to a name, but as a human being capable of choosing his own happiness. And then, unexpectedly, the unraveling of truth continued. One evening, Mrs. Khadija went through her old storage room, sorting out belongings that had accumulated over the years. There, tucked among forgotten treasures, she found something she had never noticed before, an old diary belonging to her late mother-in-law. As she flipped through the pages, she discovered entries describing the same bracelet, its history, its sentimental value, and a confession of how its loss once caused conflict within the family. But then came the revelation that struck her deepest. A passage describing how she herself, years ago as a young bride, had been unfairly accused in the household of losing a piece of jewelry. How it damaged her confidence. How she vowed never to judge another woman the same way. Yet she had. And Sanaa had paid the price. This truth broke her. She realized Sanaa wasn't simply a reminder of her past. She was a mirror reflecting every mistake she had tried to bury. And the one person who could help her heal was gone. Humbled, she called Armin into the room and shared everything. For the first time, mother and son saw the full truth. The bracelet had never been about theft or guilt. It was about generations of pride, hurt, and unspoken trauma passed down like inheritance. And in that moment they both knew. They needed to find Sanaa. Not for reputation. Not for obligation. But for closure, forgiveness, and perhaps the start of something new. The unraveling of truth was complete. Now came the journey toward redemption. The search for Sanaa began with a heaviness that neither Armin nor his mother could escape. Though the incident with the bracelet had started everything, the true wound was deeper, tied to years of expectations, silent regrets, and a family culture that valued reputation more than humanity. They both knew this wasn't just about bringing her back. It was about healing old fractures and choosing to become better people. Armin visited every place she might have gone. The neighborhood where she grew up, the roadside food stall she once mentioned, the charity center where she used to volunteer. He spoke to people who remembered her, a woman with quiet strength, always willing to help, always carrying more worries than she let others see. Most didn't know where she had gone, but they spoke of her with respect, which only deepened his fear of losing her forever. Meanwhile, Mrs. Khadija battled her own journey of redemption. She realized she couldn't face Sanaa until she confronted everyone she had allowed to influence her judgment. Her relatives, her in-laws, even her own husband. One by one, she spoke difficult truths, that she had allowed pride to overshadow compassion, that she had judged a young woman by her social class, and that she couldn't live with the guilt any longer. Some mocked her transformation, others avoided her, but she no longer cared. Her conscience mattered more than their approval. Weeks passed before the first real clue surfaced. At a women's community center on the far edge of the city, a social worker recognized Sanaa's name. She had seen Sanaa once, thin, exhausted, wearing borrowed clothes. asking if there were any temporary jobs available. But she had left days later without saying where she was going. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As their search continued, life at the mansion changed subtly. The house staff noticed that Mrs. Khadija treated them with a gentleness she had rarely shown before. She joined their conversations, asked about their families, even apologized for moments she remembered speaking harshly. These gestures didn't erase the past, but they signaled a sincere shift in her heart. Then one evening, a worker from a small textile shop called. Sanaa had been working there for 2 weeks, stitching clothing in long shifts, keeping to herself. She was quiet, focused, and clearly trying to rebuild her life far away from the people who once judged her. Before dawn the next morning, Armin and his mother drove to the location. The textile workshop was cramped, dim and hot, filled with the hum of sewing machines and the metallic smell of fabric dust. They found Sanaa in the back, pulling threads from freshly stitched garments. Her shoulders were thinner than before, her eyes tired, her movements careful, as if she feared taking up too much space in a world that had pushed her away too quickly. When she looked up and saw them, her expression froze. The moment stretched painfully. Fear, sadness, and underneath it all, an old, unspoken ache. Armin took a step forward, but it was Mrs. Khadija who spoke first. Her voice trembled, not from fear of being rejected, but from the weight of all the apologies she owed. She didn't blame Sanaa for leaving. She didn't beg her to return. She didn't excuse her own actions. Instead, she spoke honestly about her mistakes, her biases, her regret, and the guilt she carried since finding that forgotten diary. She admitted how deeply wrong she had been, how unfairly she had treated her, and how much effort she had made to change since Sanaa left. Her words were not dramatic. They were raw, vulnerable, and painfully sincere. Sanaa listened silently, her hands trembling around the fabric she held. She didn't respond immediately. Her heart had been wounded too many times, and every apology pulled at scars not yet healed. She wasn't ready to accept forgiveness, nor ready to reject it. She only knew she didn't want to return to the life that had nearly broken her. Seeing her hesitation, Armin spoke, not with desperation but with respect. He told her he hadn't come to force a choice or drag her back into a world she feared. He came because he couldn't live knowing she believed she was alone. He had ended the engagement, reshaped his life, and confronted the people who once controlled him. He had done all of it not for approval but for the truth. The workshop owner, sensing the gravity of the moment, quietly led everyone outside to give them privacy. Under the pale morning sky, Sanaa finally found her voice. She said she needed time, not to run, but to rebuild the trust she once had in them, in herself, and in the idea that love could exist without pain. Her words were soft yet firm, a boundary drawn by someone who had learned the cost of giving too much without receiving enough in return. Armin agreed. He didn't ask for an answer, a promise, or a decision. He asked for a chance. And for the first time in a long while, Sanaa didn't turn away. Over the next few months, a slow, gentle healing unfolded. Sanaa continued working, but now by choice, not desperation. The textile shop owner promoted her to a slightly better role after noticing her dedication. She took evening classes to complete the education she had abandoned long ago. Her life was simple, but it was hers, and she guarded it with newfound strength. Armin visited her regularly, not to pressure her but to accompany her on this journey. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat in silence. Bit by bit, the emotional walls between them softened. She saw his sincerity, his growth, and his willingness to understand her world rather than drag her into his. Mrs. Khadija, too, worked to rebuild bridges. She supported the community center Sanaa once visited, donated sewing machines to the textile workshop, and opened her home to the staff in ways she never had before. She didn't do it to impress Sanaa, but because she finally realized that dignity should be universal, not selective. One day, months later, Sanaa returned to the mansion, not as a maid, not as a stranger, but as someone invited openly and respectfully. The staff greeted her warmly, remembering her kindness. The grand hall felt different too. The house no longer echoed with judgment, but with a quiet warmth that wasn't there before. Mrs. Khadija gifted Sanaa a simple necklace, not expensive, not symbolic of status, but meaningful. She explained that it was something her late mother-in-law had once given her, not as an ornament, but as a reminder to treat every woman with honor. This time, Sanaa accepted it. The final turning point came during one peaceful afternoon in the garden, where Sanaa and Armin sat beneath the shade of an old tree. The breeze carried hints of jasmine, and for once, there was no heaviness between them, only calm, only clarity. Sanaa spoke first. She said she didn't want a life built on guilt or compensation. She didn't want to be saved, protected, or elevated. She wanted equality, respect, partnership, and the freedom to choose her own destiny. She wanted a love that grew from sincerity, not fear. Armin listened carefully, then told her something he had waited months to say. He didn't love her because she was vulnerable. He loved her because she was strong. Because she survived without bitterness. Because she valued kindness in a world that rarely offered it. He wanted a future with her, not perfect, not easy, but honest. For the first time since everything collapsed, Sana allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by her struggles, but by her choices. She realized forgiveness didn't mean forgetting pain, it meant freeing herself from it. And so, under the quiet shade of that tree, she gave her answer. A soft, hopeful yes. Not to a proposal, not to a promise, but to a beginning. A beginning where love wasn't a burden. Where dignity wasn't negotiable. Where her past didn't define her future. A beginning built on mutual respect, honesty, and a hard-earned peace. And that is how the maid who once picked up a bracelet, an object that nearly destroyed her future, found in its wake something far more precious. A life chosen freely. A love built slowly. A future shaped by courage, not circumstance. But also the beginning of everything she deserved.